hopefully happy accident, depending on how this goes. But this morning we are going to be looking at that text. Go ahead and open up there, if you will. 1 Peter chapter 5, starting in verse 1. If you don't open up there, you're going to miss out. So the other thing I want to mention before we begin, if you want to jot it down, is I said on Wednesday that I didn't know where we were going to be next. So this morning I'm saying in our class on Wednesday we'll be looking kind of at chapters 9 and 11. Chapters 9 and 11, talking about the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity, as well as the councils that happened afterwards. So we'll be looking at that. But as far as our lesson goes, we are today, as has already been mentioned, going to appoint some new men as elders of the Lord's church here. That is a big deal for the church. That's a big deal. Anytime that happens, it means that there is going to be a continuation of hopefully what's already been happening here for many years, but it provides some security or some stability into the future. And that's the way that God intended for it to work. And so this morning we're going to take a look at a text here in 1 Peter that deals with elders just a little bit, and we're going to reflect on what the attitude of an elder should be. Not just what makes a person qualified, but what do they need to be like in their character. And to do that, we're going to start out looking at a little bit of background as far as our text goes. First things first, we are in the book of 1 Peter. Okay? So in 1 Peter, if we're reading that book, it means it was written by Peter, the apostle. And it was written probably around 62, 63 AD. And it was, of course, then some 30 years after Christ had left this earth, and only a couple of years before Peter, the apostle, would leave this earth. He dies in the persecution of Nero about 65 AD. So this is shortly before his death. Of course, he still writes one more letter after this point. But he's writing a little bit later on. But what we know also is that at this time, he's still following, the church is still following the pattern of New Testament leadership. We've talked about this quite a bit now in the last 2 Wednesday nights. But this is one good example that we see of what the leadership in the early church looked like. One of the reasons we know that is because of the words that are used in the first 2 verses here. There are 3 words that are used interchangeably, meaning you can replace one with the other and it doesn't make any difference. And all 3 of those words refer to the same office, even though today some people like to distinguish between them. And the 3 words, starting in verse 1, it says, the elders who are among you. I exhort, and I, who am a fellow elder, and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. And then he says, to shepherd the flock of God, which is among you, serving as overseers. 3 words. First word in verse 1, elders. Second word in verse 2, shepherd. Third word in verse 2, overseers. 3 different words in English, 3 different words in Greek as well. Those 3 words are the 3 words that are used to describe the office of elders in the New Testament. So when it uses presbyteroi, the Greek word in verse 1 there, we're talking about those who serve as elders or bishops. And then when you get down to shepherd here, of course that is the idea of shepherd or pastor, as it's translated both in the New Testament. And then also we have the word overseer from the word episkopoi, which again refers to an overseer. So in looking at these words, we see that the structure was what it was supposed to be, that there were multiple elders that governed each local congregation. And so that's how it's supposed to be today. But the reason that we know that there were multiple elders over one congregation is because of what we also see here in verse 2. It says, shepherd the flock of God which is among you. We talked about on Wednesday nights how the structure changed from being one elder or being multiple elders in one congregation to having a head elder in that congregation to eventually having one elder over that whole congregation and then having one elder over multiple congregations. Well, this verse clearly says that you should shepherd the flock of God that is among you, as in the one that you are a part of, the one that you are encircled by is the idea. So you don't become an elder over multiple groups, but just the one that you are already among. Okay, all that to say that when Peter writes, it's still very clear how this is to be set up, how the eldership is to be set up. But what's Peter's goal here? Well, he says in verse 1 that the elders who are among you I exhort. So his goal is to exhort. Well, we don't use that word very often, and your translation may say it differently, but to exhort means, it can mean different things. Originally, or the original word being used here is parakaleo, which you may have heard before, but it means to call alongside. That's probably still not very helpful as far as modern English goes, but it would mean something like to call someone to listen to you. Or it could mean to encourage. That's sometimes the way that we translate it. But that's what's going to follow. So Peter says, okay, elders, listen, I'm going to tell you something. And then we see everything else he says. I'm going to encourage you. And that's the intent of the rest of these verses here. The other thing that's interesting in verse 1, he says, of the elders that I exhort you, I who am a fellow elder. So Peter reveals himself to be an elder. He's actually the only apostle that we know that was an elder, but that's not that impressive because we don't know what happened with a lot of the other apostles anyway. But he is, in fact, an elder. Based on Peter's lifetime, based on his chronology, he's probably about 65 years old when he's writing this. That does not say when he became an elder. He'd probably been an elder for quite some time. We know that he was, in fact, married. There's probably a good connection there between him being married and him being an elder that is revealed in the New Testament. But regardless, he is in that office, which is kind of neat because that means anybody else who steps into the office of the eldership is sharing the same responsibility that Peter the apostle did when he was on earth. So he also says here in the end of verse 1 that he is a partaker. Well, he says he's a witness of the sufferings of Christ, as in he saw them with his own eyes. And then he says, I'm a partaker of the glory that will be revealed. Peter says, I am an elder in the church. I saw Jesus die. I saw him do miracles. I saw him ascend into heaven. And I know for a fact that I will be part of the glory that will be revealed. As in when Christ comes back, I'll be part of the experience of going to heaven alongside all Christians who are faithful. He has assurance, he has confidence in what he says, and that is encouraging to us as we read from Peter's account here, that we have the same hope that he has. But what do we learn then about the attitude that an elder should have? Starting in verse 2. 3 verses 2 through 4 actually in our text. So again, 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 2 through 4. He says, shepherd the flock which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willingly, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly, not as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. There's a lot of things in these few verses for us to look at, and we'll break them down almost word by word in looking at this text. First thing, of course, that it says is shepherd. That word meant a shepherd that would actually work with sheep back in that time. So it's used figuratively here of the souls that they'll be taken care of, but it comes from that same word that just meant to take care of sheep. But spiritually, these shepherds take care of the sheep that have been given to them. But let me make a very, very important distinction here. An elder does not take care of his own sheep. It just doesn't happen. An elder, instead, it says, shepherds the flock of God. An elder doesn't take care of his own sheep. He doesn't have any of his own sheep. Maybe his family in a sense, but he takes care of what God has entrusted to him. He's a manager of, he's a caretaker of the sheep that God has given him. Now, why does that matter? Because if I break something that's mine, big deal. If I lose something that's already mine, it's annoying, but it's not a big deal. But what if I lose something that's somebody else's, that's precious to them? Is that a problem? Well, God has entrusted his sheep to these elders. He says, you're going to take care of these souls. So if someone leaves the congregation and I say, well, I should probably reach out to them, but I'll let somebody else take care of it. Or, well, I know what they were like when they left. It's probably better that they're gone. If I say that as an elder, I'm saying, I don't really care about God's possession. It's not that it's my sheep, but I've lost something that is God's. So it's worth going after. Second thing that we talk about here is being an overseer. Now, in the New King James, it says serving as overseers. In the King James, I think it says taking oversight of, something kind of like that. So if you're using the verb to serve and then talk about overseeing, it seems that there's kind of an irony there. You're overseeing something. You're in charge of, you're in power, and yet you're serving in that office. You are a servant to all. And of course, according to Christ, the greatest among you will be your servant, according to Matthew 23, verse 11. So this role is to oversee the whole of the church, and yet to be a servant to the church. So there's a balance that has to be found between those two things. But what does it even mean to have oversight of? What does it mean to be an overseer? It means to look after. It means to inspect. This is from the original language. The definition's there. It means to take care of. So it's not that you're an overseer as if you're the man that's in charge of everything, that you're the Lord of everything, as this next verse will talk about. But instead, you are the one that is to look after. But what are you looking after? I think as our world has gotten a little bit more secular, a little bit more worldly, a little bit more materialistic, the change of elderships has focused, or the focus of elderships has changed. Let me get that straight. So they've changed from one to another. It should be, of course, that the elders care for souls. They look after, they have the oversight of people's souls. But instead, what are we seeing a lot of times with elderships? Is it the eldership's job, is it their primary focus to take care of the building? Is it the elder's primary focus to take care of the grounds? Is it the primary focus to make decisions on behalf of the congregation? Is the budget the primary focus of the eldership? Is the day-to-day concerns of the church, is that what the elders take care of? No. Not if they're doing the job according to the Bible. Instead, they take care of souls. They take care of souls. The reality is, if you have a church building that is beautiful and spotless, and the grounds look great, and everything's going well with the budget, and even if you have all of that going for you, and even if from the outside things look good, if the souls of the congregation are not taken care of, it does not matter. The most beautiful church building in the world doesn't get a single person into heaven. So the elders focus not on the physical, but on the spiritual. It's part of the attitude that they have to take on. As another example of this, as a different way of saying this, you can make a lot of comparisons here, but I'll make the comparison of a parent and a child relationship. So if a parent is to watch over a child, I think we could agree on that. If a parent is to watch over a child, we would say, okay, that parent needs to make sure that their hair is combed. Yeah, okay, that might be important. They need to make sure that they're dressed well. Okay, that could be kind of important. They need to make sure that they decide on all the things that their children need to be doing. Okay, that may be important too. They need to make sure that their grades are okay. Yeah, I guess so. That's pretty important. But what if you do all of that and you don't care about what's going on in your child's mind? And you don't care about what's going on in their heart? Have you done the job of a parent? Hopefully the answer is no for you. But if that's true for the parent, it's that much truer for the elder. If you take care of all the physical concerns that you can, and the souls suffer, then the job of the elder has not been done. This year, and I'll say this as a blanket statement, or maybe ask it as a question, have elders been more concerned about physical things or spiritual things over the last year? And that's a difficult question to answer. And I'm saying this as the church, the world over. And as the world has become more and more focused on the physical, even especially with this virus, which I'm not trying to belittle its importance, but at the same time has the emphasis been on the spiritual health of the congregation or the physical? I think too often the question there can have a negative answer. So also looking at this, another statement that's made here in verse 2 still, says that they should not serve by compulsion, but willingly. So they are not to serve because they have to serve. If that's your reason for being an elder, that's not a good reason to be an elder. If that's your reason for serving in the church in any capacity, that's not a good reason. It's all a question of motivation. So what motivates you to become an elder? What motivates you to serve the church? Well, the suggestion is that some, in verse 2, some have done this for dishonest gain. What is dishonest gain? Well, it's getting something that you don't really deserve by a means that was probably not very proper. So you get dishonest gain. Now, in this context, I think it's pretty clear it's talking about money, that you've used the eldership to line your own pockets, but it could go beyond that, to say, well, what if it's pride that you get from the job? Not the good kind of pride, the bad kind of pride. What if it's a desire for power, a desire for influence, and that's why you've taken on the role of the elder? Or what if it's a desire to control what's happening? Or if it's the desire for respect? There's a lot of dishonest gain you can get from being in a leadership role. And if that's the case, if that's the reason you're doing it with a very bad motive. It'd be better to not be an elder at all. Another statement is made in verse 3. It says, nor as being lords over those entrusted to you. Again, they're not your sheep. They're entrusted to you, the verse says. So you're not lords over them. What does that mean? It means you don't try to control them. Now, let's go back to the parent and child analogy. Do you try to control your children? In a certain sense, yes. You try to make sure that they stay below a certain level and try to guide them in the right decisions. But do you control their every aspect of life? Hopefully not. You let them make their own decisions because that's who they are. Well, yeah, you have to an extent. And there's a balance with all of this. But the idea here is that you don't take your power and say, okay, I'm going to make you do what I think you ought to do. The eldership is to guide the congregation. It's to lead the congregation along, not to drag the congregation with it. So not lording it over, not trying to control everything that happens. But it says the opposite of this is in verse 3 still, but being examples to the flock. So if you're not going to be a lord over the flock, how do you get them to do what they need to do? You do it yourself. As in, you show them how to do this. You become an example to them. The question is, do you set an example that you want other people to follow? Do you want your children to behave the way that you do? If so, great. If not, what do you need to change? Do you want the congregation to reflect your habits? If so, great. If not, what do you need to change? So, elders are, whether or not they want to be, they are the examples to the congregation. And congregations rarely exceed the level of spirituality of their elders. They rarely exceed the motivation level of their elders. So they are the example. Now, with all this being said, the last statement here in verse 4 is, when the chief shepherd, I think we can guess who that is, when Christ returns, when the chief shepherd returns, he'll come with a reward. For those that have been Christians, certainly there will be a reward. For those that have been elders, it seems that there's a little bit of icing on the top there. That they'll receive this crown of glory that does not fade away. Now that crown is not only reserved for elders. We're promised in a couple other places in the New Testament a crown of sorts. But even that's not the reason that elders serve. Even that's not the reason that Christians serve God. But it is part of the reality that they will be rewarded for the work that gets done. And that's a good thing. The other side of this is the attitude not just of the elders, which hopefully we've explained everything that Peter has to say on the subject here. The other side of this is the attitude of the congregation. This comes from the next few verses. So start reading with me in verse 5. In verse 5, it says, likewise, you younger people, submit to your elders. Yes, all of you be submissive to one another, and be clothed with humility, for God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. A few things we learn here as far as the congregation goes. The first thing is to submit to your elders. The elders can only do an effective job if the sheep are willing to listen to what they have to offer. If the sheep are rowdy, if the sheep are trying to go off in any direction they want to, and they're not submitting to the elders, we got a problem. And the church isn't going to grow, the church isn't going to go anywhere. But this submitting to the elders is a conscious choice. Some people question the idea of whether or not Christians should place membership in a congregation. And I understand it because the wording is not there in the New Testament. The concept may be a little shaky, but it's passages like this that make it clear that whether or not it's a formal agreement of any kind, if you're going to be part of a congregation, you have to submit to the elders there. And what that means is that you say, I am willing to serve under this eldership. I'm willing to respect the authority that God has given to this group. And I'm willing to be a part of that. So we have to submit to the elders. It goes farther, though, to say in verse 5 that you be submissive to one another. So not only are the members submissive to the elders, but the members are submissive to each other. And the elders are submissive to the other elders. And to an extent, the elders are submissive even to the members. How? Because you all submit. Let's get all the way down here. You all submit under God. So you submit yourselves under the authority of God. You submit yourselves to one another. It means that you allow others to have influence on you within the church because that's how God designed it. But you all submit to God. And when you submit to God, God will exalt you in due time. He'll lift you up. He'll raise you up. There's an irony here that if we want to be a better whatever it is, if I want to be a better Christian, if I want to be a better elder, if I want to be a better deacon, teacher, just regular member, preacher, it really doesn't matter what you fill in the blank with. If I want to get better at that, how do I do that? I lower myself so that God can do the raising up. I don't try to exalt myself, but I let God do that in his own time when I submit to him. Next statement here, and we're almost done, but in verse 7 it says, casting all your care upon him, for he cares for you. God cares about you. God cares about your concerns. God says, tell me your cares. Tell me your anxieties. Tell me your feelings of inadequacy. Tell me your goals. Tell me how you want to grow. Tell me in what ways you desire to serve. Tell me how you want to improve, because I care about that. I care about what happens in your life. Let's extend that now. Should we say, the same thing should be true for elders? That you can cast your cares on the elders. Why? Because they care for you. That's their whole job. Their whole job, according to the text that we're reading this morning, is to care for the souls that are in this congregation. So if you have anxieties, if you have inadequacies, if you have goals, if you have ways that you want to improve, what do you do with them? You tell them to God, and you tell them to the elders as well. If the elders, this is a two-sided coin here. If the elders don't ask, and if the members don't tell, if there's no communication, how is the church ever going to grow? And how are souls actually going to be looked after if the souls aren't communicating with the shepherds that are supposed to be watching over them? The attitude of the congregation is important, and the attitude of the elders is just as important. And if they both have the right attitude, the attitude that is clearly outlined here in 1 Peter chapter 5, the church will grow. And it will grow quickly as a result. It will grow in a deeper spiritual connection with each other. It will grow in the knowledge and grace of God. It will grow in number. It will grow in every way if we are willing to be submissive to one another, submissive to the elders, and submissive ultimately to God. This morning, why does that matter? Why does it matter? It matters because of verse 8. In verse 8 it says, "Be sober, be vigilant," as in look out. Why? Because your adversary, the devil, is walking everywhere around you like a roaring lion. A lot of times we read that verse or we quote that verse out of context. Why does the context matter? Because if you go back to verse 2, who do you think that adversary, who do you think that lion is trying to devour? It might just be the sheep that make up the flock of God that these shepherds are charged with their oversight of. They're charged with the care of. God warns the adversaries looking for you as a sheep. If you want to be safe, you make sure that you're submissive under this eldership. And if you want to be safe, elders, make sure you're taking care of those sheep. That's the plan that God has for keeping individuals safe. So what do? Well, as members, we be submissive, we be faithful to God. As elders, we be submissive, we be faithful to God. This morning, if you've been unfaithful to God, it's a great time to come back to Him. This morning, if you've never become a child of God, again, this morning is the perfect time to do that. If there's any way that you, or any way that the church can help, if there's anything you need from the church, be willing to ask, because the church, as the verses say here, should care for you as God cares for you. If there's anything that we can do for you, come forward now as we stand, as we sing.